Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly radio show about the current state of Ultimate. I'm the host and the editor, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me, Ultiworld senior editor Keith Rayner. LeBron got it done last night, Keith. Becomes the number one all-time scorer in the NBA. Amazing stuff. I'm curious if you have a thought. Who do you think is the all-time leading scorer in Ultimate Frisbee?
Oh my gosh. Well, if there's one thing that connects Kareem and LeBron, it's longevity. So we need to find somebody who was playing high level Ultimate. Like if you just want to like only national level events or whatever, like it's got to be somebody who played for forever. So I don't know, like, or can we count international people? Like,
well, so that's the thing. I think we have to maybe define what the scoring is, right? Like, is it only in the club division? I mean, like that would be the comp to the NBA, right?
Yes.
It would be club, regular division, like men's, women's, mixed. There's almost no chance it's somebody from the mixed division because it hasn't been around long enough. I mean, I guess it's possible, but I don't think we were going to count college. I don't think we should count international tournaments. I think we just have to call it like USAU Club. That's, guess what my question is getting at. Obviously, you could define this in multiple ways, but if it's just USAU Club and not Masters, who do you think that it would be?
I'm saying it's got to be somebody who played a high volume role for a really long time. So, like a Dom Fontenette kind of thing.
Dom Fontenette is a good guess.
You got to find somebody who was at it for a while and near the top for a while.
Marinella, or is he? I don't know how much scoring he did. Is he more of a thrower?
Are we counting like points, like assists and goals combined?
No, I'm saying goals specifically.
Oh, I would take both combined. I mean, to me, that's basically the equivalent.
Fair enough.
I'd say that's points, as you will.
I'm cool with that. I think there's slightly different things, but sure. I mean, Bo's got to be up there, right?
Yeah, yeah. I do think Bo would be like on the list
but I don't know if he played long enough. But like he was easily their leading scorer for a decade, and they were always winning, which meant they were always getting to 15 and like scoring more goals than the other team. Right?
Yeah, wait. Don't forget back in the day they used to play 21. So
well, that's a good point. That's a good point.
I don't know if they played as many games in a season. I'm sure it's like
they probably played more.
Probably.
They probably played more. It's probably somebody from the 80s.
Yeah. I think that's probably if we went back, it would be if you just like limited it to the like USA Ultimate era, like then you started looking like Mickle. And Dom still might be up there. Surge,
like since the name change.
Yeah,
that seems like a little too recent.
I know it's a little tight, but like Ultimate's not that old, so it doesn't take that long to get into like into what feel like the olden days, even though they were only 20 years ago or whatever.
Anyway, I just thought I was thinking about that as I saw LeBron had 20 in the first half last night. I was like, well, he's going to do it tonight.
I may have bet the under. I was concerned though once I saw how many celebrities and his family were there. I was totally on board with the narrative. I was totally on board with the narrative that he was just going to coast because he wanted to break it against Milwaukee and Giannis in a big national TV game and wouldn't want to break it in OKC. He wouldn't want to be there for it. So I was totally on board with that narrative. I thought, he's going to take it easy. He'll go out there and drop 22 or whatever. He'll pass a lot, maybe take some minutes off. And then they were losing too. So I was like, oh, now he's here. Now he really might sit. But he was on one and then breaks the record in the third quarter with like 10 seconds left. And they just totally stopped the game and had like a 15-minute ceremony.
As I think is appropriate.
Weird.
I know. I don't think it's weird. I don't think it's weird.
I
don't think it's weird.
It's super weird.
Nobody cares about this game. Nobody cares about the OKC
Thunder,
Lakers game in the middle.
Both of these teams are fighting for playoff position, and they're in a game that was like a 5-point game.
I'm sorry. This is classic doldrums of the NBA. Middle of February. Nobody cares about this game.
I'm not saying they couldn't do the ceremony. I'm just saying they could have waited 10 more seconds until the quarter ended and done it between the quarters. I
completely disagree. The moment passes. You got to stop the game. I think it was the right thing to do. I think if something like that happens in Ultimate, we should do the same thing.
I wish that there was any sort of data tracking in Ultimate. When I was at Emory coaching, I did try and compile the career stats for the players while I was there, because I kept pretty robust stats. I was pretty detailed as far as like making sure I got every game and every goal. So I did. By the time that I left, I was there for 5 seasons, so I was able to like get a full cycle and like compare career stats. I would love for that kind of thing to exist. I mean, I guess you could go through and dig through what's at USA Nationals, but on the website, A, we know that the stats are not really that accurate, but B, like tracking the stuff off the website is actually pretty hard and doesn't go that far back. So it's like we don't have the tools. The data, too much of the data is lost, sadly. But it would be great to have these kinds of data for Ultimate. It would be so fun to compare these numbers.
It really would. It's a sad thing that it's just the nature of the game makes it very difficult to keep stats in that way.
Well, I mean, look, the AUDL is 10 years in. Like, they have ostensibly some history, and they have career data. They can tell you who's had the best individual season, and it's great to have those data sets. They play one game at a time.
You just sit there, you watch a game, and if you didn't watch a game, you watch a video. Like, it's a completely different beast. You know that.
Yeah, that's fair.
But it is nice. It is nice to have that. That's why it's a better fan product. All right. Speaking of the AUDL and the other semi-pro leagues, we have schedules for all 3 leagues: the AUDL, the Western Ultimate League, and the Premier Ultimate League. They just dropped their schedule yesterday. So let's take a look at the 2023 schedule. I think most interesting to me, Keith, the AUDL. They're going to have a lot of interdivisional games this year. And they're starting to do something that I think is actually pretty important for the league's growth long term. And what stuck out to me immediately, as soon as I looked at the schedule, you got your typical stuff. It mostly looks like past seasons. But New York is doing a road trip to Colorado and Salt Lake City in July. And this is the kind of thing that is a big deal. If you're in Colorado and you want to sell regular season tickets, do you know how much easier it's going to be to sell tickets to that game? Like, we have the league champion coming to town. We have all of these star players from the AUDL on this team, and they're going to be here competing in Colorado. Like, when big teams come to town to play the Knicks, like, that hard to get tickets. They get expensive. This is why pro sports can be fun. And just playing the same teams in your area all the time, like, sure, it's good to have those rivalry games too, but getting the draw of the big out-of-market teams to come in and have that matchup, that is huge. I think it's a big deal. I think we're going to see that go well.
I am far more glib, I guess, around that. I don't know that people go to AUDL games to see the opponent. I don't think we're there where the league has that kind of star power. I don't think there are going to be people who are in Colorado who are like, oh, this is my chance to see Jimmy Mickle in person or Ryan Osgar, I guess I should say, in person.
No, it's not going to be Jimmy, I'll tell you that. In person.
Not Jimmy. Not anymore. Not these days. I'm not going to see Ben Yacht in person. Like, I don't know if maybe Marquez, maybe people will go out to hang out with Marquez, get his autograph. Like, maybe that's part of the deal, but it's cool. I like it. Like, I think it'll be fun for fans of the league to get a real comparative sense of the divisions in some way. And certainly to see these top teams going against each other. But I am very skeptical that it'll have any impact on games, on gate numbers.
Wow, I totally disagree. I mean, I don't think this would be true of all teams, but I think New York is going to be a draw.
New York is the one team I could see maybe having some exception, but I still just don't think fandom in the league has developed in that way. I think most people go to watch their team with players they know, and that's kind of the full size of it.
I guess. I mean, the thing is, it's like if you're aware enough to go to the game. I mean, sure, there's like people who are just like, oh, I'm just going to go because it's a fun thing to do, and I don't really follow the league, and I don't really care. But if you actually follow the league even a little bit, like you're going to be way more likely to go to the New York game than the Detroit game, right? Like that is just a simple fact. I don't know. I think it's a bigger deal than you claim. I think it's a bigger deal than you claim.
I think having a good game against a good team means more than the individual players on the team.
I give you that.
That's the contention.
But I think that there are players in the league who have some actual star power.
Well, keep an eye on the tickets. Maybe do we need to send a pollster? Do we need to have an exit poll?
We gotta send people to the game. What else stands out to you from the AUDL schedule, Keith?
Certainly getting a chance to see the cross-divisional matchups is pretty exciting. It's obviously fun to highlight DC and Carolina, which is an interdivisional game, and getting to see that as a marquee matchup to start the season. That's pretty exciting. Like at least they made a good choice on that front, and really the game of the week schedule on paper looks pretty good. It definitely looks like they made a good selection of games that are all pretty compelling on their face, given what we know about the teams right now. It is that interdivisional play that I think is the thing that we've talked about for a couple of years. Feels like it's been missing. So getting more of that is the biggest thing to me.
Yeah, I think should be interesting. I'm a little disappointed in the game of the week schedule in that they like really pick and choose the teams that they put on those broadcasts. Only 15 of the 24 teams are on the game of the week. And I want to see Houston. I feel like fans are going to want to see Houston. They don't give Houston a game. Now, Houston's probably going to be bad. Say that
in 4 or 5 weeks.
Houston is probably going to be bad, but it's the expansion team. It's still a narrative, even if they suck. Like, you're telling me that you couldn't get them against Dallas, and that to me is like, do you want to do that every week? No. Do you want to do that once a season? Yes, I think you do.
Yeah, I'm not with you there.
Do we need 3 DC games?
I've seen enough of the dregs.
Do we need to see
Boston
at DC?
Games.
Do we need to see Boston at DC?
Probably not. But
with 2 other DC games, I don't need to see this horrible Boston team. I mean, I'd rather see a new team. Just speaking for myself.
Yeah, I think you're going to be singing a different tune about 6 weeks in.
I mean, I appreciate.
You're gonna be like, I'm glad I don't have to watch this Houston team.
I appreciate that they focus primarily on the good teams and good matchups. Don't get me wrong, but I think there's room to show us an interesting team. And it's not like I'm advocating for them to put Detroit on the broadcast, although maybe
I don't understand what's the substantive difference here.
That is unfair to Houston.
Now, why do they have? Yet. I want Houston versus Detroit. Now that I might tune in for.
Oh, geez.
Break the streak on the big game. Also, another thing that stood out is that we won't have to deal with the blackout games, right?
That's correct. That's a big change.
That was awful.
It was terrible. So FS2 is all tape delay. The only live game this season is going to be the championship. All of the other games are going to be aired live on AUDL.tv and then shown typically later that day on FS2, later in the evening. Although, TBD. So I don't really know who watches these FS2 broadcasts if it's not live and it's tape delayed at 10 or 11 p.m. But at least if you're an actual fan of the league, you can watch the best games. That was a total disaster last year.
It was like, even though it was like didn't occur that often, like it wasn't that widespread, And when it happened, it just felt like this sucks.
It was
this
painful.
sucks bad.
Painful. Remember the East Coast playoff game you couldn't watch, the New York DC game.
Really bad.
Oh,
and it was so thrilling. I mean, it was like the game of the year, and
couldn't watch.
Oh my gosh, ridiculous.
So the AUDL regular season gets started April 28th. Got 13 weeks of games through July 23rd, and then 3 weeks of playoffs, divisional first round, and then the championship weekends for all the divisions, and then the actual big AUDL championship weekend in Minnesota, August 25th and 26th. So the Western Ultimate League announced their schedule a couple weeks ago, and they're going to go in a hybrid again, maybe a little bit more of a hybrid with single game matchups throughout the season, but also the kind of the weekend style matchups where a bunch of teams converge on one city and then they play 3, 4, 5 games over the course of that weekend. And so it's a 10-week schedule, starts March 10th, runs through May 14th. And then there's a 4-game championship weekend, June 3rd and 4th in Seattle. So pretty cool to see this. The clumped weekends, Keith, are in Arizona, San Diego, Utah, and Colorado this year. And then the championship weekend, of course, in Seattle.
And you gotta, when you look at this, I mean, just like I said about the UDL schedule, opening weekend, like that is the hype. And that's exactly how you want to kick it off, right? Is with something really exciting. And you get the rematches from the playoffs last year. You get Seattle versus San Diego, Oregon against Arizona. You also have San Francisco and LA playing on that weekend. But I mean, who doesn't want to see Seattle and San Diego right now? Like that is the marquee matchup in the league, and we're getting week one.
I think maybe game one too, right? I guess we don't necessarily know exactly what the schedule will be, but that's going to be a lot of fun.
Those rosters, which also came out, are, well, they look like juggernauts right now. I think it's the narrative around the season is going to be a lot about San Diego versus Seattle, and so having that to set the tone for the season, to be able to talk about, okay, these two teams matched up, and then, if it comes all the way back around to them, being able, okay, we have their week one matchup. It was 10 weeks ago, though. Like, what does it mean? A lot of narrative building to be done there. Of course, you also have the new franchise, Colorado. They're playing in week 2 at Utah. But the other thing that stood out to me, I guess, about the schedule wasn't really something as a whole. I was like, man, I feel like Arizona has a tough schedule.
Yeah, Arizona really got
a raw deal. So this year they're splitting into 2 conferences, the league. Now they have 8 teams with the addition of Colorado. So there's a Northwest Conference with Seattle, Oregon, Utah, and Colorado, and a Southwest Conference with San Diego, San Francisco, LA, and Arizona. But there is interconference play based on like pairs. So you play 2 teams from the other division, and Arizona plays Seattle and Oregon from the Northwest Conference. Tough. And then they play San Diego in their own conference. So San Diego has the same schedule, I believe, except they play Arizona. So that's a pretty big change. Arizona really, I feel like, got the toughest schedule basically as a reward for making the playoffs last year.
I like the general plan, though. 8 games for each team. You play every other team in your conference twice, and then 2 out-of-conference games. Like, that is a really logical schedule. I continue to be impressed with the way that the Western Ultimate League has kind of like set up their season, designed, like, you see, to me, it's a perfect example. The fact that they have the marquee matchup in the league as the season opener is very smart. Like, that's going to get people excited and wanting to tune in right away. And so I like the adjustments to the schedule this year. And we'll see what happens. I think we'll see if I would like to see one of these leagues at some point do something like the NFL where they power match a little bit the schedules based on the previous season's results. Because the way that works in the NFL is like, if you're the bottom team in your division, for instance, you get an easier schedule, at least on paper, for the following season because you're playing more of the bottom teams from the other divisions in your next year's schedule. And so that's what creates kind of like a balance to the league that doesn't just keep the same teams on top all the time.
That's kind of happening here if the 4 playoff teams are being matched against one another.
Fair.
That's kind of what happened. I mean, that's the top half of the league. So that's basically, I'd say, like playing out in some way. The other thing I think that's interesting about the schedule, I do like that they're going to continue their kind of hybrid scheduling move of having these kind of mini weekends. I think those are nice they feel different. It gives the rhythm of the season a little bit of difference and uniqueness. But I also think the schedule is a little more balanced. Like last year, because of the way that the schedule was structured, you had some teams that like finished their season like 2/3 of the way in, you know?
Right.
So this year it feels a little more evenly distributed. There's only like 1 week where there's one game, I think. And the rest of the teams feel like they're playing throughout the year instead of kind of like this awkward cutoffs.
Any other notes on the 2023 schedule, Keith?
It all comes down to how that opening weekend launches. I feel like there's going to be a lot of hype around it, and there's some additional notes in the article that Jenna Weiner put out that gives you a little more detail about all the things to look at, including interconference. There's a bunch of interconference games week 4, 5, and 6 that I think will be really defining for the playoff picture.
You know what's interesting? You mentioned the Arizona tough schedule. They get those Oregon Seattle games in their season opener weekend at home. So it's kind of like you really want to see them get one of those games, right? It's going to be tough to beat either of those teams, but I think playing at home, you certainly got a chance to catch one of those teams still kind of knocking off the rust a little bit. It's certainly going to set the tone for the rest of their year.
Oh, and speaking of balance, that does bring up another point. With having 2 games against every team in your conference, you can do home and away. Last year, the schedule a little imbalanced in that function too.
Right. Okay, so then the PUL just dropped its schedule yesterday. Teams will be playing 6 games apiece, so less than the AUDL's 12 and the PUL's 8, or the WL's 8. The season begins week 1 with Columbus at Raleigh and Portland at Austin. That's April 1st and 2nd. That leads through 11 weeks of competition leading up to the championship weekend on June 16th and 17th. I believe that the league has not yet announced where the championship weekend is going to be held. The rumors are buzzing for sure, but no decisions yet made. A little bit less of a clearly balanced set of schedules, although you do play all of the teams in your division in the PUL, but because they have fewer games, you don't get that same home and away balance. And then there's usually like 1 or 2 out of division games, depends on the team, a little bit more sort of like geographically focused, as of course the league is spread out quite a bit across the country, stretching really from Portland to, I guess, Austin would be the furthest away.
I still, though, am a bit surprised. I remember looking at the schedule and being like, I'm surprised at how much travel there is involved in the schedule. With kind of the way that these cities are located, I perhaps expected less of this. But like, I mean, you look at the opening weekend, and you got teams traveling all over the place. You know what I mean? Like, Portland going to Austin, that's just not a short trip.
It's about as far as it gets.
Yeah. So it's there are a number of trips like that. I feel like through the various things, and maybe that's just because Austin's not close, but like you got New York going to Minnesota and Milwaukee. There'll be Minneapolis and Milwaukee for like a back to back. So there's definitely some travel in here that was a bit surprising. I also I have a lot. I remember looking at the schedule, and the first thing I see is Cole at Raleigh.
I know.
And my brain is immediately
I
like
did the same thing.
Columbia. Then they left the league, and it's like Colorado, the new team. Wait, nope, that's Western Ultimate League. I don't know. I've lived in Columbus. Like, I don't hate on Columbus, but not the most known COL.
I mean, that's just a natural. It's natural to think of Columbia specifically. I think because they're playing Raleigh, and you're like, oh, that's going to be a great matchup, and it's like, well, it's not going to be quite as good as it was. The COL of the past perhaps a bit of a better challenge for Raleigh.
The Pride with a new logo, and Raleigh with a new logo. Both those teams, I think, with new logos this year.
That's right. So, only 1 week. There's 2 weeks with more than 4 games. Week 8, they've got 5 games. In week 10, the second to last week of the season, there's 6 games. That's going to be a big weekend. I mean, you've got Minnesota at Milwaukee, Columbus at Indy, Austin at New York, Austin at Philly on the back-to-back, Raleigh at DC, and Nashville, Atlanta. It feels like you could definitely have some playoff spots decided that weekend. Remember that in the PUL, the winners of each of the 3 divisions get a playoff spot, and then there's like a wild card spot for the algorithmically best team remaining. So that's a pretty interesting little wrinkle in the way that they do things.
And I think it's a function of the imbalanced schedule. I mean, you need some way to feel like you have a fair comparative of the teams, and without being able to have a fully balanced schedule, that I think that's part of what forces them to arrive there. But yeah, I mean, week 10, late in the season, a lot of big matchups that could lead to some real excitement. Week 8's another 5-game weekend, so it could be fun coming down the stretch here in the PUL and having a lot of games that have a real impact on the playoff picture.
So that's the schedules for all 3 of these leagues. Of course, action gets started in March. The Western Ultimate League kicks things off. The PUL is second and the AUDL third. And that will all be rolling throughout the spring and early summer. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk some college ultimate. Florida warm-up took place this weekend. A couple undefeated teams, Keith. We got to talk about them. And then we'll look ahead to the Queen City tune-up as well, coming up this weekend down in Charlotte. Well, south of Charlotte in Rock Hill. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Deep Look. Hit the alarms, Keith. Hit the sirens. Breaking news as we're recording the pod right now. The Club Working Group update coming out from USA Ultimate. And this is where they have their little annual meeting. And they kind of talk about the upcoming season, make changes to the rules or the structure in order to, just make things better. So,
Charles,
some note. Go ahead.
Can I give the big lead here, because this is something we've both been really passionate about on the show.
Go.
Uniform and attire requirements is going to be rule enforcement in this area is a point of emphasis in 2023. Teams will have to follow the uniform guidelines. That is a point of emphasis. It's written right there. That to me is the lead.
I hope that USAU's backup jerseys are hideous. I mean, I want them to be all double XL, giant, like screen print, like it real sticks to your skin. Get good jerseys and wear them. Thank you. It is not that hard.
But the real big story here, Charlie, is something you and I have talked at length about, which is that there will be a new pool decision process for club nationals, and they will be opting to use World Cup style draw.
This is a dream. This is the dream.
I'm grinning ear to ear.
He really is, folks. We have been beating this drum for a while, and it's actually happening. So they're going to use the post-regional rankings to determine the top 4 seeds, which are automatically placed into each pool. That's just like they do in the World Cup. They seed the top of each group, and then each of the next 4 teams will be in pods of 4 that get randomly placed into each of the pools. Now, I love this, and I'm quoting directly from the USAU article. 2 teams from the same region cannot fall into the same pool, with the exception of regions with 3 bids or more, where up to 2 teams could share a pool. So if there's 2 teams from your region, you're guaranteed not to play each other in pool play. And that makes so much sense. Like, in some ways, I didn't really like the way they did this in the past, where they would not, if the team was supposed to be seeded 12th, and that meant that they were in the same pool as another team from their region, they still did it with few exceptions. I've been watching their seeding process for years. This just takes all that out of this. And now it's just like, no, like let's get a good mix of teams. It's better for the teams themselves. It's better for the competitive quality of the tournament, I think. And this is just going to completely remove, it still means rankings matter, right? You still want to be in a higher pool, right, or grouping to get put into the pools, but it doesn't have this like sort of arbitrary cutoff for a few rankings points here or there.
And like, I mean, rankings mattering at all, it's like been a hard thing. And I don't know how much it's going to change that part, besides being the 1 seeds, which is nice to lock into your position. But yeah, this is exciting. I mean, it's narratively interesting, right? Like being able to like find out what the pools are going to be should be an exciting process. I actually don't care that much about the region thing. Like I would prefer that ultimately, like it feels like making fair entries is the most interesting thing here, but I also don't care that much. Like it's totally fine. Does not really bother me. The only thing better, I think, would have been, I forgot who came up with the drafting idea, like having the 1 seeds draft the pools. Like that would be the most fun, but this is such a great outcome. Like this I think will lead to some really interesting pool balancing.
Other notes, Pro Flight play-in will be a little bit different once teams are eliminated from contention. You can switch opponents if you want to. There's some rules around that. Roster cap will be 26 players at events with no season roster cap. That's for Classic and Select Flight events. For the top level players in Top Select, Elite, and Pro Flight, roster cap is 26 with a maximum of 32 players for the regular and postseason. The deadline for committing to a single team for the club season is now July 4th. So that is earlier than it's been the last couple of seasons. Kind of returning more towards what we saw in 2019. Additionally, let's see. I think the other big piece of news is Pro Elite Challenge is being split into 2 tournaments, East and West, like Select Flight, which kind of is what we've sort of de facto seen, not through TCT, but with typically a strong tournament being organized. You know, if I guess it's been more around Pro Champs, but if Pro Champs is in the East, we're seeing something getting organized in the West. This kind of like creates that earlier in the season. It should allow for a little bit better, reduced travel costs and more regional based play.
Yeah, this is great altogether. I mean, it sounds responsive. There's also things about being able to switch rosters, but not being able to return to a team. There's a focus on women's division equity in field assignments, which they cited as a pain point from surveys. Like that is being responsive to your members. And that is, I feel like, aside from communication, like one of the number one complaints about US Ultimate is it's like a lack of responsiveness. And this feels like what it should feel like.
So yeah, we'll see. I mean, there's more rules to come out when the guidelines are dropped. They're not out yet. So a digression there. Let's turn our attention now to Florida warm-up down in sunny Tampa, Florida. I was down there this weekend, Keith, and live streaming games to the world. I know you got a chance to watch a lot, so perhaps a more informed discussion than usual at this point in the season.
And Charlie, I'll have you know, while you were palling around in the sun, it was like literally
so
0 degrees where I was. There were no degrees to be had. Not a one.
My uncle lives in Vermont, and I think he posted it was like -17.
Oh, with wind chill, it was serious wind chill here. I think I saw that in New Hampshire. They posted the lowest temperature in U.S. history. I don't know if that's just continental U.S. because I think Alaska was the closest, but it was like -100 something with wind chill.
That's insane. I'm not gonna lie. I was pretty glad to be in Florida. So 2 undefeated teams this weekend. BYU finally pulls it off after a couple of years of going 7-1 and coming oh so close to winning all their games at warm-up. They did it this year with a team that was supposed to be worse against probably the toughest schedule they've had. And they did it. They beat all comers. Now, they didn't have to play Massachusetts, the other team that went undefeated, going 5-0 in match play and then winning in quarters over Georgia Tech 15-4. Carleton in semis 15-8. And then Minnesota in the final 15-13 in a game that wasn't quite as close as I think that scoreline makes it sound. Very impressive performances from both teams. So Keith, where do you want to start? I mean, do you want to who do you think the better team is right now?
Well, let's just. I feel like are the UMass leaving early jokes dead? I feel like this puts them in a casket.
I got a little snipe at them up on top of the scaffold, and I said, "This is the last time you're going to hear about it," and they were cool about it. They were cool.
We did have some resurfacing of old BYU tropes in the Discord that I know particularly irk you, but look,
yeah,
BYU,
because people aren't trying against BYU despite the fact that the games matter exactly the same as every other game. It's totally ridiculous.
Yeah,
BYU is really good, folks. Just stop saying that people don't try.
Yeah, no, don't bother with it. BYU went out and won all those games and won them for real. And I mean, I got to be more impressed with BYU overall. Although, they had some close games, right? Like that Carleton team that got absolutely wrecked by UMass, they were right there step for step with BYU. So like maybe that's your point of contention. Maybe that's the argument you make in favor of UMass. And it's hard not to be colored by the way that BYU looked on the West Coast too. But I mean, this BYU team has taken all comers so far. I guess they also both play Vermont. Is that right? There's some commonality in the scheduling, but all in all, they mostly had pretty different schedules. I wish we'd gotten a chance to see them play one another, but we didn't. I found myself a little bit like there's something about this UMass team that I'm not quite sure that I buy, and maybe that's not quite the same for BYU. But I would definitely take BYU personally over who was the more impressive team in the weekend.
I mean, just the schedule alone. I mean, UMass didn't really have to beat anybody for a while. I think that's the big thing that makes BYU's weekend more impressive is that they had to beat all the good teams except UMass. But I don't know, Keith. So here's my take on Massachusetts. First of all, it's stunning that this team didn't make nationals last year. That's number one. It will be it'll feel catastrophic if they don't make nationals this year. And the thing is, it's not an easy region. And I know that Brown and Vermont, and we'll get to them, didn't play their best this weekend. Brown missing a lot of players, Vermont missing some players too, and also kind of just laying some eggs early in the tournament. But UMass looks very athletic, very deep. I think they have really strong O and D lines, something that you didn't see from every team. Really distinct O and D lines as well. Didn't have to cross people over in order to get breaks. I think that the huck heavy style that they're playing with feels a little bit kind of out of the norm for what we've seen from UMass, at least in the past. But I also think that, it's a high volatility kind of strategy. I think when they're hitting, they seem unbeatable. And what I worry is that, if you get to regionals and you're playing against a team and, you're not quite hitting, could that cause them to have some problems? Maybe. But I really think that this looks like the kind of team that is the real deal. They have completely choked the life out of Carleton's offense. And, they kind of let Minnesota hang around, even though I thought that they were the better team pretty much the whole game. That game ultimately could have gone the other direction had they not just taken care of business late in the second half. But it didn't really feel like they were ever going to lose. So I overall, I was extremely impressed with the team. I think that they have 4 or 5 guys who are just top class college players. And they seem like they have a lot of confidence coming out of a lot of them playing club over the 2022 summer.
That was the thing I think about them that had me hyped up going into the season. And last year, obviously, they had Orion Cable, Wyatt Kelman was hurt at the end of the year. Having him back was clearly a huge stabilizing force for them, but they were balanced. They played confident. It was clear that the club season really helped some of those guys. I came into the year expecting Noel Sierra to have a big year after his club season, and he was really strong for them. But yeah, they not only do they have like 5 or 6 guys who were just rock solid, but they didn't really put anybody out there on the field who was making a lot of mistakes. They looked really balanced. The general throwing skill was at a really high level for being this early in the year. Wyatt Kelman looked really good. Luca Harwood, Gavin Abrahamson, the rookie, he had a great weekend for them. Really added a bit of speed to a team that I think maybe was lacking in that area, perhaps. I do think, when I look at this team and there's something about them that feels a little bit off. It is maybe a little bit of lack of star power. Like, yeah, maybe Harwood or Kelman could be that guy. Or I know Jonas Stagg Osborne drew a lot of attention with the big throws. I also think that deep attack was like really thrower driven, which I think is really hard to sustain. You got to be hitting because they're not the biggest, most athletic, fearsome team. I don't like they're not going to be able to hit on a lot of jump balls. I don't think. They were just putting up great throws. They played good defense, not amazing defense, but they were just solid, consistent. For me, I somehow feel like their ceiling isn't that high. Now, there are a lot of young players on this team who I think have a lot of chance to get better, which could boost them. I'll be very curious what they look like in their second tournament. But the floor just feels extremely high. Like, they're just too solid right now to bet against as like, they're good enough to make the semis at any tournament they go to, if not better. And if Nationals was this weekend, like I'd feel pretty confident. They're very confident they're going to make quarterfinals and feel like they had a shot at semis.
Well, I mean, they slide up to number 4 in the power rankings, and that feels about right. And the thing is, like, look elsewhere in the power rankings. The next 5 teams are Minnesota, Georgia, Pittsburgh, Carleton, Cal Poly, and then Brown at 10. And I'm looking at these teams, and I'm looking at UMass from what I saw this weekend, and I'm like, well, who is going to outplay UMass from these teams? I think Pitt's got a chance to be better, but I still think there's a 4th spot in the national championship semis, and right now I think it probably goes to UMass because I just don't see where else it's coming from. I feel like they have more depth than Minnesota. I feel like they have more depth than Georgia. They completely destroyed Carleton. Where is Carleton going to come up with answers there? Now, the thing is, teams are going to adjust to the Huck-heavy strategy. We know this. But at the end of the day, you say it's thrower-driven. I think that's true. I think that's a good way to play Ultimate. I think it's a much more sustainable way to do things than to have to try to rely on cutters to win jump ball situations. Like, hucking to space is very powerful. And the thing is, it's not like Stang Osborne and some of these other throwers can't pump fake the deep throw. You pull 2 defenders deep, and then you get easy unders. They showed the capacity to grind unders, even if they were looking to be aggressive.
I'm not sure that Stag Osborne can look off a deep shot. I'm not entirely positive about that, but you're right. It's on the whole. I mean, the guy was slinging. I
mean, if you got full field hucks on both sides,
flaunt it,
and you're on the D line, like, let's pick it up and let's do it.
Yeah.
But I mean, they put a rookie line on at the end of the game against Carleton, and I can't remember how they got the turn. It might have been a layout D, and then they worked it 70 with no turns and scored to win the game with a break.
That's disrespectful.
it was like, whoa. I was like, whoa. Like, I couldn't believe that they worked it the whole way up the field with more like sort of standard kind of unders offense. So I think that, their rookie class is pretty impressive, Keith. I don't know. Like, this team has semis written all over it. I mean, that's why I say it's crazy they didn't make nationals last year.
It was really windy. It was really windy there. All the credit to them. I mean, they certainly went out there and earned it. These were not fluky looking wins by any means.
Not at all. Just a quick note on BYU. Look, this team is fantastic. I mean, they're clearly a top 3 team right now. I was talking to one of the BYU guys, says that there's a good chance they're going to get to play Colorado at some point this year, either at Centex or Colorado might travel to Provo to play them after BYU traveled to Boulder last year to play Mama Bird in Boulder. So that will be fun to see, who's the best team out west. Right now, I think I still probably put my money on Colorado, but there's a little more star power there, but BYU is very formidable.
Yeah, they're everything you've heard about. They're big, they're fast, they play hard, they play disciplined. They're a great team.
So let's take a look elsewhere. We saw Carleton get to semis. Clearly a good weekend overall for the North Central. Wisconsin played well. Wisconsin gets a universe point win over Texas to get the last spot in the quarters and knocks Texas out after Texas had an unbelievable start on day one. They don't even make the bracket. So Carleton, Keith, Declan Miller. Now I know we talked about it. I know we said that, the hype is there for this kid to come into college and be an impact player. But I mean, we're talking about somebody who came in and was like obviously the best player on the field for Carleton. Like the centerpiece of their offense instantly. And somebody who's going to have to be in the conversation, not only for Rookie of the Year, where he's obviously the front runner right now, but for an All-American spot. I mean, I don't think that's crazy to talk about at this point. Now, he had some turnovers. It wasn't perfect performance by any means, but he's just so clearly the most dynamic player on the field for Carleton.
And look, I said last week, I think that the ceiling for him could be an All-American.
You said it.
Position. He was probably even better than I thought he was going to be, particularly defensively. You do not see a lot of rookies who have a lot of hype come out and play hard, effective defense. Like, it could have been really easy for him to just be like, all right, I'm just going to go out here and do my thing on offense. But no, he was out there talking on defense, which is impressive to see. And really, he was not the only person on Carleton. I was kind of like, all right, how's this team doing so well? Like, when they had so many problems last year, but they were getting production from a number of other players. Sam McCarty had a good weekend. Leo Jordan, Daniel Chen was making some big plays. I mean, they looked pretty solid up and down the roster. So this could be a real resurgence for a cut team that had given plenty of reasons for people to write them off.
Yeah, and I guess it's hard for me to assess quite what they're going to be. I think I see a lot of athleticism. I have some great deep cutters, and at times their offense looked really good. Defensively, I didn't really feel like I saw the kind of cohesion necessary to stop top O-lines. But, for this point in the year, this is maybe the best I've seen Carleton look at warm-up in a while. And I think that's a really good sign for them, because I think they certainly have the pieces on offense to become one of the better O-lines in college. And whether their defense can get there will probably determine how far they can go at nationals. But I think we're looking at a 3-bid North Central, Keith, with the way the teams played this weekend.
Definitely a great start, which puts more pressure on the conversation that we had last week about the Southwest and the Northwest. Where are all these bids going? Who's getting them all? Because New England, Northwest, Southwest, and now North Central are all fighting for these bids. There is not going to be much left on the table for anybody else. And obviously the Atlantic Coast, like, are they going to get 3? It's going to be competition. Is Ohio Valley going to be able to get 2? Like, bid watch is going to be real spicy this year, I feel like.
Yeah, and as we get into the bigger tournaments later this year, I mean, that's when it's going to get decided. Smoky Mountain, Easterns, Centex, there's going to be pivotal individual games that determine whether a bid goes one way or another. But, you look at Wisconsin, right? They lose to Brown. They lose an in-region game to Minnesota, and they lose to Pitt. I think those are going to all age just fine. They get a win over Texas and a win over Michigan. Those are huge, huge wins. So I think Wisconsin clearly is just like sort of lacking on offense right now, which I feel like is pretty normal for them at this time of year. I was talking to their coach, Becky Ladonna, and she said that they hadn't played together for like 3 months before stepping on the field at warm-up. So, I don't know if they have enough talent to really ascend. I think Minnesota is clearly the top team to beat. I think if I had to power rank them right now, I'd say Minnesota 1, Carleton 2, Wisconsin 3, but Wisconsin's going to be a tough team to beat. They grind.
I mean, they went 15-13 with Minnesota. They lost, but they're right there.
What else stood out to you, Keith?
Well, we got to talk about New England. I think Brown. It's going to be there's going to be concern at first, and then everybody's going to be like, oh, they're missing some key players, especially for a team that's so reliant on their top end to play well. Not a big surprise when you don't have Leo Gordon, that your offense is going to suffer. I don't know how much they would have been open rotation anyways, but a little disappointing even for the fact. But honestly, like when you look at the resume, given who they were missing, I'm impressed that they managed to keep it close with Georgia, that they managed to beat Wisconsin. So I'm not worried about Brown yet, even though they fell to I think 10 in the power rankings. But Vermont, yeah, it's a tough start for Vermont.
It's a tough start.
FrisbeeRankings.com says they didn't sink their chances yet, but it's so early. Obviously, it's hard to take much heart in what the rankings say. But yeah, coming out and losing your first 3 games, including not close to Texas, who they lost to twice, it's a rough start.
I mean, here's the interesting thing, right? So they took 2 losses to Texas. They lost to Minnesota. They lost to BYU. They don't really have a great win, although I think 13-8 over Northeastern is going to age well because I think Northeastern's pretty good and a 5-goal win is pretty solid. How good is this Texas team? I mean, Vermont has the pieces, Keith, but the offensive structure right now is not going to work. They were trying to run a lot of Dominator and they just were not really on the same page. And it just felt like it was kind of like an unsustainable way to play the game. They just had too many O-line turnovers. It's that simple. I really want to see them. Now, they were missing a couple pieces. I think that they're going to play better later this year. But what's their ceiling? I think they maybe need to reconsider a little bit when and how they want to run their offense. Like, do they want to use that Dominator like as many points as they did this weekend? I'm not sure that's the right move. Teams are getting smarter about it. We saw teams pulling the weak side cutter defender down into the box to stop the weave. And Vermont didn't attack that very much when that happened. They were not hitting that, blade or hammer cross field to punish that poach. And it's hard to do that. I mean, it's becoming a zone almost at that point. And that's a difficult throw to get off, especially if it's windy at all. So I don't know. I think Vermont, there's a lot of hype, a lot of buzz, a lot of expectations for the team and for everybody watching this team. And I think that, they kind of got punched in the mouth. And I think it's going to be a little bit of a reset and a wake-up call for them. Lots of jokes on the sideline about how they screwed the Northeast or the New England out of a bid. So we'll see what happens later this year.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they respond to this too, because they seem to be a team that like kind of prides themselves on not taking themselves so seriously. But it's like, how much of that is the right amount of like lack of sense of urgency? I'll be curious what they look like in their next form. I mean, it's good that they were able to bounce back a little bit and they got into the softer part of their schedule, took care of business, didn't play any close games. They beat Northeastern. They play closer with Texas at the end of the weekend. Like, that's all good stuff. And I think even from the reports on the ground, they just looked better as they went through the weekend. So maybe just a rough start, maybe just tough out of the gates. I can't imagine that they're playing much outside. I think they tweeted at some pit and like had some indoor event canceled for snow or something like that, and they tweeted calling pits off while they were playing outside in the snow. So can't have had that much good time for them.
Brown, on the other hand, the ceiling is clearly lower on this team with some of the pieces that they've lost, but Jacques Nissen looks like he's going to be the best thrower in college this year. I mean, I watched him throw like 8 straight hammer completions for goals, and they just like nobody could stop him. He had a couple of mistakes. He had some drops, but the big problem for Brown is they're just not deep at all. I mean, they really drop off hard after their top like 5 or 6 guys. And I think that's going to be a real challenge for them. The thing is, their offense is still going to be really difficult to stop. And I think they could win a lot of games just with Nissen. And I think we saw that this weekend, right? The reason that they're winning some of these games.
What are you saying about this team that we haven't said about them for the last 4 years?
I mean, it's a great point, but I feel like they were deeper than this last year.
Maybe. I think with the added, once they get some of their guys back and they have a chance to build up a little bit. I mean, I think what this team is specialized in doing is specialization. I mean, we talked to them about it last year. Like, they're good at taking those bench guys who are not that overall talented and figuring out, okay, how do we make the most use of what you do well in order to benefit the team? Like, how can we get you to do these one or two things really well and then let Jock and Leo take care of the rest? Because they have so much experience building systems to do that and building up players and coaching that and leading that kind of process, it gives me a lot less concern about what their long-term is going to look like.
Okay, so then we got to talk about Pitt and Georgia. Pitt loses to Georgia on Universe in quarters. And, that's a game that Pitt had won back at CCC. It's a game I expected them to win coming into the game. And, they had chances to win multiple times with the disc on Universe. Couldn't get it done. What is this Pitt team, Keith? Like, they have the best player probably in college right now in Henry Ng. They have a supporting cast that I think is up to the level to be a, national championship contender, and yet they're losing in quarters. So what's going on here?
Well, they played a Georgia team that's hot and cold. Was Henry Ng the best player in that game against Georgia?
I honestly think Aiden Downey was the best player in that game.
Yeah, that might be the case. And so, I mean, you want to see Henry Ng go out there and dominate, even against a great player like Downey. But
there were possessions where Henry was not involved enough, in my opinion.
Tristan Yarder, Marcel Oliart, both awesome for Pitt. They get a lot out of their downfield guys. Your Scott Haymans, your Dylan Garrett's. I'm not concerned about them really at all. Maybe I'm a little okay, I'm not quite sure if I see a team that can win a title right now, but it's so early. And it feels like there's so much more that Henry Ng could give to the team and that they'll get from some of these other players. They might not be as deep as what we're used to. They don't quite have those big star recruits that they used to have. But I still found myself I'm watching this team play. I think they may have a tighter rotation when it all comes said and done, but they're still pretty solid at the top end. And so I think they're going to be able to compete, especially when they have a couple stars they can really rely on. I mean, I think Tristan Yarder is ready to be All-American level player right now.
Oh yeah, he just needs to iron out a couple of little mistakes. He had some tough turnovers. He had the last turnover of the game against Georgia.
But even both of the turnovers that he had, I guess the last one was a little rough. He tried to kind of throw in OIO forehand that turfed, but both of those were also borderline coverage sacks. There was just not a lot of options for him.
Sure. I mean, I guess my point is he has the capacity to be a great, fantastic, All-American first teamer this year. I really like Pitt's chances to kind of figure things out and get a lot better because they have a long track record of doing that. I feel like they're one of the teams generally that is at its absolute best at nationals. That doesn't happen for every team. Certainly didn't happen for them in 2020, but last year I think it did. And they got to semis last year. I think that they can certainly get that far again. It's just a question of can they clean up the pressure offense situations, because I think it's a great early test for them on Universe against Georgia, where they should have won that game and they didn't, and they need to figure out what they need to do differently in order to execute offensively down the stretch.
Now Georgia, you want to talk about execution? I mean, Georgia was a team that, like I said, they were hot and cold, and I was actually a little disappointed, I think, with their overall ability to execute. Their weekend on the whole ended up looking pretty good. They beat Brown, they beat Pitt, they beat Carleton, split with them, and lost again to Minnesota by 1.
Crazy Universe point loss.
Yeah. But I was a little disappointed, I think, with their level of execution and consistency, and I feel like that could come back to bite them at points. A lot of these players are returners. They've been with this team through the past 2 seasons. I expected they would have perhaps a little more skill across the team, a little more discipline. But they've got time to work on that. I mean, they're still an athletic, fast team. They're still deep. And they have a couple of guys who can really quarterback each line. And that goes a long way. And there's clearly talent throughout the rest of the roster. You see your Ryan Flicks, and they've got the rookie Scott Whitley, who played with Chain, Cole Chandler. Like, there are plenty of guys on this team who can go out there and get it done, but they just have to do it at a little higher level consistently.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have the pieces to build around, though. They just have two fantastic players in Downey and Adam Miller. And I think that they've got enough athleticism and particularly like great defensive players to be a really tough team to beat. I don't know quite how to project this team right now, but I don't think semis is out of the question for them. Certainly, they had a lot of close games this weekend. I'm not quite sure what to make of that, but close loss to Carleton, close win over Northeastern, close win over Brown, close win over Pittsburgh, close loss to Minnesota. They stay in games, but they don't necessarily put away teams either. Can they improve their execution offensively? That's probably going to be the thing that sets them apart, because I think defensively they're going to get breaks.
I agree with that. I mean, they're going to be able to generate turns, and being able to put Downey out there on some defensive possessions, and obviously being able to turn to Miller, like, they're going to be able to get breaks probably, but it's really just going to come down to how well they execute. All
right, so let's see what else. I've hardly even looked at the consolation results. Texas does end up winning out in the 9th place bracket. They get wins over UCF, Auburn, and Vermont. That's a nice second win over Vermont to close out the weekend. Elsewhere, Georgia gets the win over Carleton in the 3rd place game. Wisconsin beats Michigan in the 7th place game. Pitt cleans up easily in the 5th place bracket. I think Pitt's going to certainly look back and say, man, we really should have won that Georgia game, because otherwise they had a great weekend. 1 point loss to BYU and mostly dominating wins everywhere else. So interesting overall weekend, Keith. I think it's always, you learn a lot. There was some still days. There were some windy days, and teams look pretty sharp, all things considered, for early February.
Yeah. Shout out to Paul Krennic. He looked good. Georgia Tech, they had the light schedule. They got beat pretty handily once they went up against some of the big boys and lost to Vermont and UMass by a lot. But they did beat Michigan. So they're sneaky in the Southeast. I think both they and Auburn showed some signs, but I don't know what their shots are really for winning a second bid, given how competitive the bid picture is going to be. They really could have used some more signature wins. Like that Georgia Tech win over Michigan is pretty valuable, but those blowout losses are not going to help. So the Southeast, good news, bad news kind of situation. So got some good teams, but did not do themselves a ton of favors to position themselves for the bid picture. And the Florida teams really struggled, but Auburn and Tech both looked apart.
Kind of a ugly ending for Michigan on the weekend, by the way. They come out, easy 3 first wins over, marginal teams. They lose to UMass by 3. I think that's a fine loss. They beat Texas. Okay, now we're looking good. They're into the bracket. They lose close to Carleton. They lose to the Georgia Tech. They lose to Wisconsin. Yikes. I think they're better than that. I think that they can. They looked, when I was watching them play, I felt like they looked like a team that could be Nationals quarters team, but I'm not sure that the end of the weekend makes me feel very confident. I mean, that loss to Georgia Tech is pretty ugly.
Yeah, that's definitely the pockmark for them. And I will say that they gave me a higher estimation of their ceiling than I would have thought coming into this tournament.
All right. Well, always lots to learn. And it's just such a fantastic tournament with the format. And thankfully, the weather held up really nicely. So not a lot of problems there. Let's turn our attention to this coming weekend, where we have the Queen City Tune-Up taking place in Rock Hill, South Carolina, just south of Charlotte. And particularly in the women's division, very strong early season tournament. Lots of AC teams, of course, both men's and women's, and always something to watch. Not quite as stacked up at the top end as you see at warm-up, but this is the most important East Coast tournament to start the year in the women's division by far. And having Carleton here after they played at SBI, massive connectivity. It's going to give us a lot of insight into the strength of the West versus the East. And it should be fascinating, Keith, to see, can anybody challenge UNC? I mean, that's, to be honest, that's the thing I'm looking for the most this weekend.
Yeah, can somebody like even get close? You know, like that. Yeah, they only played kickoff, right? So they've had their chance to pound teams, but like, I want to see how do they look when they get to semis and finals. You know, I don't expect them to see much challenge prior to that. But we do have 4 teams, one at the top of each pool, that are in that tier 1, tier 2 that we've been talking about. Vermont, Tufts, Carleton, all along that line, with North Carolina. So, you know, can somebody give them a test? And which one of those teams will emerge to do it? To me, that's really the storyline to follow. But you have a pretty diverse field, a lot of different teams that are going to be in the bid picture, whether it's your Pittsburghs or Florida, you know, Michigan. So what are these teams end up looking like? Is definitely something to keep an eye out on. How the AC fares, you know, particularly you got NC State and Virginia at 7 and 6, respectively. Who's going to be the second best team in the AC? Start to get a sense of where that is at. My money's on Virginia, but NC State looks solid to start the year. So once you get off that top line, I think you start to get mired in a bit more of the, you know, what does this mean for the region kind of conversations. But those top line teams, I'm very curious about how they stack up against one another. I hope we get to see them compete in the bracket.
I think we will. I mean, I think, you know, your Vermont, Carleton, Tufts contingent, right? Those top 4 seeds along with UNC in the women's division. I mean, those teams should make semis. I mean, I'd be surprised if they didn't. Not that it's impossible for another team to get an upset there, but I don't really see where it's coming from. And I think we learn a lot from like a Vermont Carleton matchup. And how good is Tufts? On the men's side, I think it's more about, like, for me, I'm looking at the pecking order in the AC. A lot of really good AC teams behind UNC. Who's legit? You know, is South Carolina going to back it up after kickoff? They had a really nice performance there. Are they the third best team? I mean, they have to go up against Tufts and Maryland in pool play. 2 really tough games. What's going on with William and Mary? You know, I think that there's lots of interesting sort of regional level and then sort of like bordering on like who's going to make nationals conversations coming out of QCTU.
Yeah, big tournament for the AC. You know, we have pretty much a who's who. Like the only team I think that, I mean, I guess we're missing like JMU and Georgetown, but like other than that, I mean, you got Maryland, William and Mary, Virginia, South Carolina, UNC Charlotte. They've got buzz. Wilmington can never forget about Wilmington.
No Duke. No Duke.
Oh yeah, you're right. No Duke. But we do have the Duke beaters. If you've heard on Twitter, Penn State. They're in the field, so chance for them to talk their talk. Spank. They're pretty excited, but they're all the way down to 4 seed. So like I would actually be pretty surprised if they finish that low when it's all said and done. Chance to see what Maryland's made of. I know you've been a noted skeptic. Case also in the field at a 4 seed in Pool A. I will be surprised if that's where they end up finishing too. So, you know, got a good bit of AC and then a little bit of Great Lakes and sprinkled in, and definitely not as exciting a field as we have in the women's division, but plenty of teams that it feels like could go a lot of different directions. You know,
it's time to make our picks for the tournament. We'll start in the men's division. Finalists, the subscribers have voted and they have made their choices. They're picking UNC and NC State to make the final, and they've got UNC winning it all. I don't think Keith and I are probably going to deviate too much from the winner pick anyway. Keith, I'm going to go with UNC to win the tournament, and I'm going to go ahead and match the subscribers here and go UNC, NC State as your finalists.
I wish I could report something different, but I can't. I don't think that Tufts, Maryland, Ohio State, those are the 3 ranked teams. I think South Carolina maybe has a shot at fighting their way in here. But no, I'm not. I can't get away from NC State and UNC. I think they're each in a tier of their own.
So then that brings us over to the women's division. The subs are taking UNC and Carleton to make the final, and they've got UNC winning it all. Keith, what you going with?
Well, I'm certainly going to take UNC to win it all. It would not surprise me, Charlie, if Tufts is the second best team at this tournament, but that still means they'll have to play UNC in semifinals. So that doesn't really work out well for them. I'm going to take Carleton to reach the final. Vermont not only playing in their first tournament, where Carleton's playing their second, although I will say Vermont had a pretty good Quincy tune-up last time out, despite it being their first tournament. Usually this is Carleton's first tournament. I feel like we have a history of them not playing that well at this tournament, but it's going to be their second. So I think that's going to be a big advantage. Plus Vermont missing some key players according to the tournament roster. But who knows how reliable that is, but no Sarah Von Depp. That's certainly a big one. No Lila Bannister listed on the roster currently. So those are two big impact players for them. And that kind of is going to lead me away from them and towards a Carleton team. Otherwise, I think that matchup might be a little bit of a toss-up.
I am going to go with UNC winning it all, but they're going to face Vermont in the finals, Keith. I'm going to stick with Vermont. Not only do I think that it's probably the case that there's some discrepancies with their roster here that are going to get corrected before the tournament starts, but I think that they have the pieces to win that game anyway. Carleton was good at SBI, but I was not blown away. Vermont has a lot of talent right now. I think they're more talented top to bottom than Carleton. Now, if they in fact are missing 3 of their top 5 players or whatever it is, that's probably going to cause a problem, but I'm going to take my chances and go with Vermont.
Look, how you can throw enough Kennedy McCarthy jump balls to beat a team with only Emily Posey and Kennedy McCarthy out there.
Yeah, and I think they played here well last year. If I'd seen more from Carleton at SBI, I think I'd feel more strongly about taking them, but I don't. I think Vermont is going to be the better team. So, but UNC sweep called by me, Keith, and the subscribers. Last week, nobody got points at all, basically. I did get a point for BYU going 8-0, Keith.
You did. It finally happened. I've been identical with the subscribers for 2 weeks in a row. I don't like it. I really thought I was hitting the curveball with Vermont last weekend. But yeah, not good picks. Everybody had Pittsburgh, and then it was Brown and Vermont. Nothing to be had there. So you can take your BYU undefeated points. That brings us to a tie, first place with 9 total points, and the subscribers have 8. So very much open field right now.
Just getting started. We're all knocking the rust off at the beginning.
It's early season. You gotta get the reps in.
Make sure you tune in for our live streams from the Queen City Tune-Up with a full or plus subscription. 2 games around for almost all of the rounds coming up for you this weekend. So lots of college ultimate action to enjoy. And if it's cold where you're at, you can sit inside and watch the teams playing in, I checked the weather. It's going to be mild, 50s, sunny. Should be nice. So again, you can check out all of the action in our QCTU preview and on the QCTU event page with the links to all of the live streams. That is going to do it for this week's edition of Deep Look. Thank you so much for tuning in. For Keith Rayner, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying so long, and we'll talk to you next week.